This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. It's tax season, and we're all a bit tired of numbers. But here's one you need to hear. $16.5 billion. That's how much the IRS flagged for possible identity fraud last year. Now here's a good number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it, guaranteed. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
This podcast contains adult themes and language, and some of the things that we discuss may be disturbing to some listeners. In this podcast, we discuss sexual assault, torture, race, and murder. Listener discretion is advised. Please take care of yourself.
And welcome to Fruitloops. Buiti binafi and bienvenidos, bitches. Thank you so much for listening.
Yeah.
Fruitloops is a podcast about true crimes committed by people of color and those who are othered and the victims, because there are, believe it or not, systems, institutions, and patterns in society that gatekeep this information. But we're going to give it to you straight, no chaser. The truth is, we're all capable of doing very shitty stuff.
Yep.
And all victims deserve to have their stories told. These crimes rarely get any public attention because, in the simplest of terms, the news is racist. Allegedly.
And we are Wendy and Beth. She's Wendy, a Black Latinx woman, and I'm Beth, and I just happen to be white.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's just a little piece of who we are.
Oh, yes.
But who we are not is journalists, investigators, or psychologists. We're just a couple of gals interested in true crime. Also, the opinions expressed in this podcast are just that, our opinions.
So, who are we talking about today, Beth?
Well, this is part 2 of our interview with Kat J. of ArizonaDeathPenalty.org. And it's been a really interesting conversation so far.
Mm-hmm.
If you haven't listened to part 1, go on back and give it a listen and then meet us back here.
Yeah, and I just have to say, Beth, I loved our discussion with Kat J. I feel like we're best friends now. She just doesn't know it. But it really opened my eyes and drove home the point about like humanity. And it doesn't just stop.
Right.
And the need to be treated like a human being doesn't just disappear once you are convicted of a crime or sentenced. And so, without further ado, here's the rest of our conversation. I wanted to ask you about, and this was my bad for thinking that you were like a DPIC Arizona office. That's not y'all, so forgive me for that. But I know that you guys do focus on data, collecting data that could be useful to like legislators and media and the community. So, is the data you've collected showing that the death penalty is keeping us all safer?
No.
Okay.
No.
Thank you. Care to elaborate?
You know, one statistic that came out recently was there was a comparison between last year and this year, first quarter, so that'd be like the first 3 months of the year, of homicide rates. And it went down significantly.
I've heard that.
And I'm like, okay, well, that's good. People tend to attach like the ultimate punishment, capital punishment to the, that's certainly a deterrence, right? You're not going to commit a crime if you're going to get...
Though?
It's not, because there hasn't been an execution in almost a year and a half. So you can't make these arguments of how one impacts the other when they're not happening in real time, and when most people don't think about consequences like immediately ever.
Right.
I know as a young person, I was like, I can get away with everything.
YOLO!
No one's going to catch me. So people don't think like that. It's always hindsight's 2020, right? So when you look at just data that's just like readily out there and you can go, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. They said, but the thing too is you see police budgets getting higher and higher and higher, but there's more crime that continues to happen. It's not always violent offenses. It's, theft, it's burglary, it's things like that.
We call those crimes of survival.
Yes, and that's what they are. So you can look at other things that are deeply impacting people, like inflation, where folks are struggling to buy a full bag of groceries and feed their family for 2 weeks.
Right.
And go, well, certainly these two are attached to each other. Not always. Not everyone's stealing a loaf of bread to feed their family. Sometimes they're using it to feed their chickens or goat, So everyone has different circumstances of why they do something. But I do tend to think that things that scare people, the idea of community safety is not brought up enough to like, how do we make you feel safer in your neighborhood? How do we make you feel safer going to the movie theater?
Right.
I know when we think about crimes that are scary that really are perpetuated in the media narrative, it's mass shootings, it's things like that. I know I'm still scared when I go to a movie theater. I always look for the exit, Yeah. So some of these things are ingrained into like the American psyche of fear. How do we reduce that? How do we create systems in which people feel safer in their community, but also kids are empowered to advocate for themselves and speak up when they see something, so we don't have, a Gilbert Goon situation again, I think there's a lot of things that we can do to strengthen each other and become less dependent on these systems of oppression. System.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, right? If we look out for each other, we can all help lift each other up, and we don't need the state. We don't necessarily need all these outside forces. It's like in The Wizard of Oz. It was in you the whole time. It wasn't the slippers. It wasn't the slippers. This has been absolutely illuminating. And I guess I'm just wondering, is there ways that we folks who are interested in true crime, kind of like you were when you first got into this work, what can we do to help make this system better and help you in the work that you're doing? Because I think it's super cool.
Well, I appreciate you asking. And I think the first thing is for people to challenge their own personal bias. What is something you are afraid of, and why are you afraid of it? I would definitely say that the conversation has to start with yourself before you go out and march out and say, I'm going to contribute, What is it that your personal challenges are on your thought process of punishment? What do you think really is justice? I think that evaluation of what that looks like for you is the greatest start to kind of evaluating, what can I do now? Because now I know what I think justice looks like for me. I have a better idea of what it looks like for others. And I also have a better idea of what accountability I want for a system that I pay for.
Amen. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd also say, please register to vote if you have not already.
Yes.
Please check your voter registration status if you are a constituent in Arizona. Regardless of how you feel politically, we're a nonpartisan organization. But there are some very, very, very important things that shape this issue at the legislature, with the sheriff, with the county attorneys. These people are not folks that you shouldn't pay attention to. They absolutely shape our budgets, and they're elected. And Supreme Court justices are important when it comes to appeals. So this election is very, very important. But for folks who are wanting to kind of challenge themselves on this issue and how you feel about the death penalty, I really openly invite you to get informed, reach out. I'm happy to talk to anybody about this. It's literally my favorite thing to do. But I want to hear people's feedback on, if you are adamantly pro death penalty and then you get all the data and everything and still can sit down and look me in the eye and tell me executing one innocent person is worth it so I can feel safer. That to me is like, okay, you're not going to be compelled by data. You're going to be compelled by personal testimony. And you need to talk to the Ray Crones of the world, the Deborah Milkeys, who spent decades in prison, wrongfully convicted, and ultimately became victims of the system that society supported.
Yeah.
So as we're thinking about how victimization looks like, what is our role in that? How are we as individuals contributing to that? And one, just be kinder to each other. That's my biggest ask of anything. If you're not going to vote, please be nice to somebody who is.
It's so simple. I also just wanted to shout out you saying, you're talking about victimization it's a spectrum, right? I think, on the cases that we've covered on Fruitloops serial killers of color, sometimes the person who ends up being the perpetrator was a victim all their life of circumstances, poverty, abuse,
trauma,
yeah, and it sort of contributed to where, they ended up. So it's all important, and I'm just grateful to hear you say all of that.
So when the scammer uses the hypnotic method of building rapport, then they create dysfunctional, delusional reality.
That's how a scam begins. Convincing the mark that it makes perfect sense to hand over their money to a con artist. The Scams and Cons podcast tells you how scams are run. You'll hear how people are convinced to buy fake art, buy machines that print money, or steal your house.
I get a phone call from my wife, and she let me know that they had decided to move all our stuff out. I could no longer do anything about it except go through an eviction.
And you'll hear it from the experts, people who run the cons.
So we go to your bank, you go in and get $6,000 cash, give us each $3,000, we give you this. You go home, and what you find out is cut up newspaper.
It's fun to know how the trick is done, and that's what Scams and Cons is all about. Listen at scamsandcons.com or wherever fine podcasts are found.
Something is creeping in, don't follow it down.
Let me introduce you to Barry Clew, an authorised financial advisor from New Zealand and a very special kind of stain on humanity.
He was a very knowledgeable young guy.
He was a registered financial advisor.
Type of guy that was bending over backwards to help you.
Now, you could be forgiven for thinking that Barry sounds like a great guy. And you'd be right. Well, right up until the point when you're wrong.
It was all fictitious.
She stole from my son who has a disability.
Chris never knew. He died believing that we're all taken care of.
A psychopath is somebody who lacks empathy, acts impulsively. I think there's a strong case that Barry might be all of those things, actually.
To find out how Barry Clew stole over $15 million from 81 victims, subscribe to Clueless, the long con. That's Clueless, spelt Klooghless.
Are there, I guess, people listening, there's the death penalty and then there's life in prison. Are there other options? What other options are there, would you suggest for people to ponder and consider when they're thinking about justice?
One, I would say, really weighing life in prison and the death penalty. I'll tell you, they're very tangential to each other. There's an intersecting point where I think about what torture looks like. Life in prison means that, you're going to spend the rest of your life, you are going to die here, you're going to spend every birthday here, you're going to eat this food until you die. It is also a very hellacious landscape to live in. To live in constant fear is, I think, a terrible punishment for somebody. Mm-hmm. There's politics that happen within the prison. There's different cultures. There's tons of racism that happens. Mm-hmm. So when I think about people who are like, death is easier, just do it, a bullet's cheaper. I hear you. I absolutely do. But when you're looking for accountability at some point, do you think that's going to happen when someone is under the constant threat of death? First, they have the rest of their life to live in this hellacious circumstance, and they have to sit with this consequence for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
It will impact them until the day they die.
Mm-hmm.
I think what's also crazy about the death penalty that most people don't think about is medical care. There are clients that we've worked with who have been on the edge of death, and instead of letting them die in a natural way, they've been brought back to life, essentially.
No! So the state
be...
can have the power to execute them versus
yes.
God.
Wow.
Oh
yes.
my God.
Wow, that's evil.
Oh my God.
You think about that and you're like, whoa, that is a whole other level of like, you're interfering.
Yeah.
And I've had clients tell me I had multiple heart attacks and they brought me back. And I'm like, to kill you at a later date when it's convenient for the court.
I'm sorry.
I mean, could you imagine as a victim, like, obviously I don't think victims are informed about when there's like a medical issue like this, because I think there is still some sense of HIPAA, surprisingly, in prison. But could you imagine if you've been waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, and you're going through this long, arduous appeals process, you get a notification when you got to go to court. Finally, this person's passed away, and then they brought them back to life to kill them via a botched lethal injection years later. That is, I didn't believe it at first until I heard that story multiple times from different people who have spent decades in prison. And I strongly believe that they have no reason to lie to me. Why would that? Why would that?
Right.
What kind of lie would that be? If you're going to lie about something, it would be like, I don't have any money. Put some money on my books, things like that.
Yeah.
But I've never even got that from people, So I think about, you compare that system of life and death, and one that also I think people should think about is the trauma that it causes to correctional officers and people who have to be...
They're an aspect of the system as well.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
They are regular people who are underpaid and often abused by a system that...
They're dehumanized as well.
Yes. They're also imprisoned at work.
Yeah.
They have to strap this person down to a table, their faces covered and concealed. These execution teams that are participating in killing a sometimes healthy person is probably really traumatizing. Actually, it's not probably.
I don't think
we
probably.
Know it is.
I've listened to interviews. Yeah, it is. It just is. And I don't know how we can continue to subject people to having to go through with carrying that out and to be the person who is experiencing the actual execution. I just think it's unsustainable. And I guess I'm wondering, where can people get more data, learn more about what y'all do? Where can I get a comprehensive set of data to give to my racist Uncle Bill at Thanksgiving so he can leave me alone about the death penalty and criminal justice?
I will tell you a fact specifically if he's like really concerned about the impact on race here, is that we know that Black Arizonans are disproportionately impacted by the death penalty per capita.
Mm-hmm.
There is tons of data that has demonstrated that. There was a whole trial earlier this year that talked about like the death penalty is disproportionately impacting people of
there was a
color.
New York Times article just a few weeks ago. We talked about it on the
racist.
show. Yeah.
It's also very racist.
Yeah.
I would definitely encourage him to go to our website. It's azdeathpenalty.org.
Mm-hmm.
We have a whole campaign that we just launched called Defund Death, Fund Justice, that's focused around really the costs to victims of cold cases and missing people. That these millions and millions of dollars that we're spending on death penalty, where we've found the perpetrator, allegedly, we found that perpetrator, we're throwing all this money into this system, but we don't have cold cases in a lot of counties in this state. We don't have resources to find missing people, and we certainly don't have any resources for people who have missing loved ones. They're not eligible for compensation. They have to pay these fees to get their loved one declared dead by a judge who's never met their loved one.
What?
It's a very complex system that we could absolutely fund for decades if we got rid of the death penalty.
Really?
Wow.
We have to divest from this system that doesn't work. It doesn't deter crime. And we have to support the people that we say we're helping.
Yeah.
Arizona is all about this victims' rights state, but we treat people who've experienced crime like garbage sometimes.
Yeah.
And oftentimes it's communities of color that are the last to get informed on victims' resources. They're the last to be informed on what opportunities there are to get justice. And I think of the families I've worked with who have their loved one who's been killed and the county attorney has chosen not to pursue charges, or people whose loved ones were found brutally murdered or tortured and they're cold cases.
And they get no compensation or assistance. That $25,000 that you told us about before doesn't come their way unless there's a conviction. Is that right?
It doesn't come their way unless there's a police report filed. It doesn't come their way if they don't cooperate with the prosecutor's office.
Okay.
So missing people, though, they're not eligible really for victims' compensation because they can't find them. They don't know if they're alive or dead or what happened to them. And particularly our Indigenous communities, and there are many local Indigenous tribes here and nations that are so neglected and understaffed, and it is a serious problem. We have the second highest rate in the nation for missing people.
What?
The second highest rate.
Arizona?
Yes, Arizona.
Wow.
Wow.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah. So when we're talking about wanting to be victim-centered and help people who really, really need that closure to find their loved one, can you tell me that the death penalty is helping them? Because I'm telling you right now, it's not. It's sucking all the money out of it. It takes the air out of every room I walk in, and it's deeply politicized. I want people to be held accountable just as much as anybody, but I also want survivors of crime to be compensated. I want them to have access to resources. I want cold cases to be solved. No one should have to go without knowing. And the thing of it is that death penalty cases, we know who did it. You know, they've been convicted, adjudicated in a court of law, and found guilty. They have the appeals process if they want to challenge that conviction. But there's no closure for cold cases. There's no closure for missing people. And if we aren't divesting some of this money that's in a broken system and going, wow, we really need to support these people with it, I think we're doing it wrong. That's just my opinion. That's my hot take.
That's a word. That's a word. Okay, I'm sorry. You're going to have to get one of these, Kat. Because all I hear is wisdom, no lies. Everything you said makes so much sense. And I hope that it will reach somebody out there who's like Beth and not an abolitionist like I am.
My name is Bill Huffman, and I am a former Cleveland news producer, and I am now the host of the podcast, Who Killed? I began the show focusing on the unsolved murder of Amy Mihaljevic, and now each week I explore a different case with a focus on some of the victims who don't get the attention they deserve. I have a deep catalog of over 225 episodes, so there is a guarantee there will be something for you. Who Killed is an evergreen podcast, killer podcasts, and slow burn media production. Subscribe today wherever you get your favorite shows.
The truth about the Haditha massacre has been covered up, but not anymore.
I know you know what happened.
They went into houses and killed women and children.
What are you thinking?
What a mess.
U.S. Marines murdered innocent civilians in cold blood.
And at the center of it all
is 25-year-old Sergeant Frank Wuterick.
And me. Murder in House 2, a new podcast from Crowd Network.
Beth, I don't want to put you on the spot, but are you moved at all on this conversation?
Well, what do you mean by abolitionist?
I mean, I believe in abolishing prisons altogether.
Right.
But I think that might be a bridge too far for my friend Beth.
Yeah, that's too far for
Okay.
me, but I've always been anti-death penalty.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I haven't always been. My position on the death penalty has evolved since I started this show because I didn't realize the harm and the cost. I just didn't know. And so knowledge really, really does make a big difference in our understanding. So
I also didn't understand the cost, but it never made any sense to me to kill somebody for killing somebody. It just never made any sense.
Well, and I didn't have to tell you anything about the people that I serve, right? I didn't have to tell you anything about them or how I think some might be innocent or how I think some I know are developmentally disabled. I know this state has killed people who are mentally ill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, we don't even have to get into semantics of that. We're just talking about cost and how our resources are being spent in this state that we live in, that we pay taxes for, and that they are throwing it away into something that is worthless to the majority.
Yeah.
You know,
and it's just something they want to do to make them feel better, you know.
Yeah, it's a bloodthirsty kind of retributive thing.
Yes.
You know, I think of it as gladiator days.
Yeah, it's a punitive society, and I wonder what that is about Americans that makes us so hungry for the blood of somebody who does something. Yeah, why?
Yeah.
Why? I feel like it is mostly an American issue in 2024. I could be wrong, but I mean, it just feels like we just love to punish. Love punishing.
We
get a punishment.
Love
You get a punishment. You and you.
We love stories about vengeance too.
Yeah.
For some
well,
reason.
And everybody loves a villain and a hero you know, story. And there's only so many narratives that I think film and media can portray that tell that very same storyline of, there's an innocent person, they're victimized, the person who did it deserves to be made an example of.
Right.
And the thing is, when you look at the United States history of how we treat people, how we really treat each other, and particularly communities of color, we have disproportionately, violently taken
not been
things.
Good.
Yeah, it has never. I mean, you look at the scoreboard and it is pretty uneven.
It's not been good.
Been Michael Jordan, you know, playing against a toddler for a lot of things, I think, when it comes to how things have operated in this country and how injustice has been absolutely scored against people who are poor, people who are sick, and people who are marginalized in some capacity.
Yeah.
You look at the youngest person who was executed by electric chair, and they had to...
I see his image in my head right now.
Yeah.
Me too.
His last name was Stinney, and, you know, these things are so shocking to me. You know, they stopped having to do hangings in our state because somebody's head popped off.
Yeah.
You know, they have a museum in Florence of where they have all of the nooses of all the people that were hanged.
God.
I'm sorry.
And pictures of them.
That's sick.
Yeah, they have a
They
gas
should go to jail for
chair.
having that exhibit.
Yeah, they have a gas chair for two brothers that they had to make because they put them side by side next to each other.
God.
It's so morbid and dark. And you look at this history and go, there's something wrong with this.
Yeah.
All kinds.
It ain't right.
No.
Yeah. I mean, and this is free and accessible to the public to view, but it's hidden away in kind of a dusty museum in Florence because if you put that front and center in every public place, people would be disgusted and appalled.
They sure would.
With how we have evolved as people and how we viewed punishment. I just can't iterate enough that there's a reason why executions aren't public and advertised on TV. And there's a reason why they're I would call them sterilized in a way that makes it feel very medical.
And they happen really late at night, too.
They happen either really early in the morning here, and they happen in other places like at midnight, like, okay, very theatrical.
Everybody's asleep. We could get away with it. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
And it's just, you hear about what's going on, and I think whoever's out there in a karmic or spiritual way, that we have had some reason introduced in our state where they're investigating, like we've had several botched executions where they're doing almost like a surgical procedure to get a line into somebody because the people who are the IV team are so incompetent, they can't get the line into the arm.
Mm-hmm.
But the nitrogen hypoxia, the firing squad, the electrocution, lethal injection, no matter which way you're choosing, gassing,
they're all bad.
They're all bad. There's no roulette of, you got lucky with that one.
Yeah.
They're all horrific and traumatizing to people who witness it. I've never heard of a case. I've heard, some people say, I feel better now that this is over. Do you feel better now that it's over, or that you're not being dragged to court every few years?
That was going to be one of my questions is, do victims say that they're happy that an execution is carried out on their behalf for their loved one?
I can't ever speak for victims, but from the testimony that I've heard from some do say that. Some have had children, violently murdered and have been waiting 30, 40 years for an execution.
Yeah.
I can't say if, you probably do get some sense of relief that there's some finality in this for you.
Yes.
But if this had been over 30 years ago, would you have gotten that finality and been able to process this in a different way? Probably.
Yeah.
But there are also testimony from people who've witnessed executions, who've thrown up, passed out, who said, I can't believe that that's really what it looked like. It's disturbing to hear the testimony of people who've witnessed executions where people's heads caught on fire from electrocution chairs and who were seizing and violently convulsing. We had one here where a guy was gasping. His name was Joseph Wood. His execution, because it was so botched, the state of Arizona went almost 8 years before executing another person because they wanted to let this marinate, I guess, in the public so that they forget. But there are so many things attached to this issue that are meant to be secretive and meant to sterilize it, to keep it as quiet as possible about where these drugs are coming from, who's going to do it. And ultimately just disguise what this is.
It's all secretive, and that's how it gets to be perpetuated. If people don't know and people can't see, we know something happens over there. We don't know exactly what.
It's not like,
Well, for people who learn about it, whatever, it's all theoretical if you don't see it.
I mean, I've never seen one, and I hope not to. There's several people on our row who've asked if I would pick up their belongings if it happened, and said, I don't want you to be there. I don't want you to see this. And they don't want their family there. They don't want that to be the last thing that their family sees of them. They don't want them to hold on to that graphic image of their life being slowly taken from them over the course of 7 to 15 minutes. If it all goes well, God knows what it would look like if it went really, really bad and how traumatizing that would be to people. But I generally think, if you publicize these things, you would soon see a reaction from people of, my God, what are we doing? It is state-sanctioned homicide. That is what it is and it's premeditated every step of the way.
Yeah.
So if we're not calling it that, we need to. That's the rebrand that needs to happen, is calling it what it is. I deeply think that has to happen.
We need state-sanctioned humanity. Give myself a hip-hop air horn.
Yeah. We really, 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 if at the very least, we need to evaluate what are we doing for real survivors of crime? What are we doing for people who are continually victimized by this legal system?
Right.
That leaves people in limbo for too long. And ultimately, most people are going to die on death row from natural causes,
Yeah.
So what's the difference between that and life in prison?
It's just a huge waste of money.
Yeah. So, I mean, the money aspect, I think, to me was the biggest shifter in my mind. It was also finding about the wrongful convictions, the prosecutorial misconduct, judges, and all of this stuff that I'm just like, wow, the system is absolutely insane, and we are lied to about it on a daily and frequent basis.
Yeah.
It is not... It's not even broken. It's working as it should be. And I think if people realize that
makes it worse.
more, it would make it more of a horror story. I wish there were more like horror themed movies about the legal system, because that scares me more than any, ghost entity, paranormal, alien, Bigfoot thing ever.
It's more likely.
Yes, it's more likely to happen to you.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sean McCabe.
And I'm Carrie McCabe.
We are, well, married, obviously, but we're also obsessed with the darker side of things.
True crime stories, alien abductions, poltergeists. If it leaves you scratching your head and keeping those lights on at night, we want to hear about it.
That's why we host the podcast, Ain't It Scary, with Sean and Carrie.
Every week, we bring our listeners a true story guaranteed to send chills down your spine. From history's most brutal serial killers to the mystery of spontaneous human combustion.
Yep, lots of these stories leave unanswered questions behind, and you'll get to poke through the rubble of the evidence with a hardened skeptic and...
someone whose mind is more open to fun.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
You can find Ain't It Scary with Sean and Carrie wherever you get your podcasts. And on social media at Ain't It Scary. Come play with us.
So I'm just going to recap the calls to action that you gave us. And if I misspeaking, let me know, okay? So we have looking inward at your own biases and evaluating those, vote, and look out for victims, and kindness.
And also check out our website or Instagram. If you are on those social platforms, we have sometimes calls to action for petitions or phone calls, bad bills that we're trying to take up.
Do you have a newsletter or anything like that you send out? By email?
Yeah, we send out a newsletter monthly. Kind of gives you a recap of what's been going on in the month.
And where can you sign up for that?
On our website or on our Instagram, it's just azdeathpenalty.org or at az or DPAA. I forget what our Instagram is actually.
azdeathpenalty.org.
Yes, that's the best place to go.
Okay.
And our Insta is actually DPA_Arizona.
Thank you.
So you can find, ways to connect, more data, whatever you want. You can send us a DM. It'll be me who responds to you likely. But I am happy to hear people's gripes about this system. If you've experienced this harm and you're opposed to the death penalty, that's another aspect of advocacy that is deeply needed. Those voices are so valuable, and they need to be heard by legislators and elected officials who are swayed very much by a group of people who are so angry and resentful and set on vengeance.
Yeah.
There has to be the middle ground voice there that can also be a loud voice. I think it's just there's trauma wrapped up into all of this.
Right. And everybody's trauma matters and everybody's perspective matters. And somewhere in between our collective trauma and voices, there is a solution that will benefit most of us. And that's my impression of what your goal is. A vision for the future in this criminal legal system that will keep most of us safe and help most of us. Am I right?
Yeah, and ultimately reduce crime,
Yes.
That's really what we want at the end of the day, is a safe community and people who need help to get access to it.
Yeah.
If we have all this money, all this resources to make sure punishment happens, policing happens, Why aren't we putting the same amount of energy, time, and resources into things that will actually help people, that are tangible and accessible?
We need to clip
I don't feel
that.
like I'm asking
That's
for the, a spaceship to Mars, I'm not asking for that.
So simple on a fundamental level. It almost feels like kindergarten style, like, okay, we're going to be nice to each other. And that's it.
Yeah.
We're going to treat people the way we want to be treated, and that's it. Okay.
These aren't massive lifts. I mean, you're absolutely right. It's like the fundamentals of being a good person.
Yeah.
But I mean, I get it. Everyone gets road rage. Everyone, wants to go off on people. I do it from time to time. It's usually my partner. So the thing is that I think we all can do better. I think we all can do more. And it doesn't have to be these massive Everest kind of challenges. It can be something really small and being more informed, whether it's listening to y'all's podcasts or plugging in with an abolition group or subscribing to a newsletter, things like that radically change and create this movement that I think it takes significant amount of time to get policy work done. It takes a lot more time to radically shift people to a different ideology. But ultimately, what we all need is time and some compassion for each other.
That part. Well, that was a word, Kat. You took us to church here, and I am really, really grateful that you reached out to us. This conversation was everything for me today. You made my day. I learned so much, and again, I'm just really grateful. I hope the Fruities really appreciate your insight and the work that you all do, and that we'll all be able to go on to your Instagrams and subscribe to the newsletter and do what we can all do to be better human beings in this world.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to say, or anything that you think is important that we haven't talked about?
No, I think I just want to give y'all a shout out and appreciate your willingness to have this conversation with me. And I know at first I'm like, oh, how's this going to go? But
we get that a lot.
I appreciate your open-mindedness and
Likewise.
Honestly, the research that you do on telling these stories. It's so important, and that you do it such in a holistic way that it deeply matters, especially for advocates who are trying very hard to humanize people. I think we forget that we're all human. We all have little souls, I like to believe, and those people often are forgotten that they were kids too.
Right.
We all, like I said in the beginning, we don't all get to opt into this. So I think you all do a fantastic job of really compassionately telling a story and really identifying some of these issues that it's easy to forget. You get wrapped up into the gore and violence of things, and you're like, well, they had it coming, and and I get that. I absolutely do get that.
I didn't expect those words to come out of your mouth.
They had it coming. No, I personally don't feel like that. I feel like, shoot, I can't wrap my brain around
proverbial,
all of it.
the generalized, they had it coming. That's not from Kat. She's just you heard it somewhere.
But I'm a big fan, and I appreciate all that you're doing, and I follow y'all, so I hope your subscribers do the same.
Yes, I'm following DPA_Arizona. And I'm going to go to the link tree and find your newsletter so we can subscribe to it and be informed. The website is really, really comprehensive. That's where I started after you first reached out to us. So there is a lot of information out there. And depending on what your palate is, there's something for everybody to get a little bit better. So, Kat, thank you so
thank you.
Gracias. This was fantastic. I feel like, I don't know, talking to you has made me a better person. I feel like I have my advocate pants on now, and I'm just ready to go.
Advocate pants.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that. I hope y'all can absorb some of these facts. We talked about a lot of stuff today, but
we did. Hey, quick question. If we wanted to have you back on, or if Fruities reached out and said, hey, wanted to know more about what to do about criminal legal system reform in Arizona, could we send them your way? Is that okay?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
There's folks who are like, I need to do something and I need to do it now.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. We have a whole coalition started around criminal justice policy reform, where we're going to be taking on some really big issues around felony murder, victims advocacy, victims' rights. There is a space for everybody, and our coalition's very inclusive. So if you're one of those people where I'm like, damn, this system it's not going to get me, you should definitely join that conversation and join that group of advocates. It's statewide, it's Arizona based. So if there are people who are Arizona based, they're welcome. If you're not Arizona based, you're still welcome to reach out. We have a huge network of partners across the country who do abolition work, and you can plug in with them.
Awesome.
All right, great.
Thank you so much. We are so grateful. I'm in love with you, and I'm in love with the work that you do. And I can't say anything other than thank you and keep it up. Keep it
thanks.
up. Yeah.
Thank you. Don't worry, I won't tell my partner you said that.
All right, y'all. Thank you, Fruities, for joining us. This was such a robust and interesting conversation and discussion with Kat J. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. And we just ask that you please check out ArizonaDeathPenalty.org for more information and just to check out the good work that they're doing over there. And come back and join us next week for whatever we have. I don't know what it is. Bye.
I don't know what it is.
Beth, where can the people find us?
Our website is fruitloopspod.com, and we use Fruit Loops Pod for all of our social media. The footnotes for each episode can be found on our website. Plus, check it out for the different ways that you can support the show. Also, join us on Patreon, where we have literally hundreds of hours of bonus content. You can also support us by supporting our sponsors or by giving us a 5-star review.
5 stars only, please.
Also, don't forget to subscribe.
That's right. Now, listen close. This is a weekly podcast, and new episodes drop every Thursday. So until next time, look alive, y'all. It's crazy out there. Hey, this is for us because we did it. I'm really grateful that you reached out and you were willing to come on with us and endure the 90 minutes of us. But I think this will be really, really valuable to our listeners who.
I think so too.
So I can't thank you enough. What's your address? Do you want a thank you card or a bouquet of flowers? I don't know how to end a conversation. I'm a very awkward conversation ender.
No, you're totally good. You're like, bye.
I don't know if I should. I don't know.
No.
Did I just disappear? I don't know what to do.
You just slowly move into that bush.
Okay,
that
I'm just gonna fade away.
On the morning of August 1st, 1966, shots ring out from the observation deck of the clock tower on the University of Texas campus. It marks the infamous beginning of the modern era of mass shootings in America.
You're listening to Stop the Killing podcast. Join us as we take you behind the crime scene tape to explain global mass shootings and mass attacks. I'm Sarah Ferris, but more importantly, this is Catherine Schweit, the former head of the FBI's active shooter program.
I spent 5 years as the FBI's top executive looking for answers to the mass shooting crisis. I've been at the shooting scenes, I've traced heroic acts of bravery, and I've sat silently and listened to the heart-wrenching stories from survivors.
Amongst this horror, there is hope. We all hold the key to stop the killing. You just need to know how to unlock the door. Download Stop the Killing and be part of the solution. Search Stop the Killing on Apple, Spotify, and all the usual suspects.
Hi, I'm Matt Harris. Seton Tucker and I host the podcast Impact of Influence, which for 2 years covered in depth Alec Murdaugh, who was eventually convicted in 2023 of murdering his wife Maggie and son Paul. That story continues to evolve, and we will cover that. Plus, we will tell you stories of other true crime events that have happened in the South. Please join us on Impact of Influence. And give us a follow on the Impact of Influence Facebook page.